Welcome to Creative in Tech, a podcast show powered by ReadSpeaker AI. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and I'm the brand evangelist for North America at ReadSpeaker. And this show is all about highlighting the various people, brands, and organizations that are creatively using some of the fastest growing spaces in technology, conversational AI. And we are finishing this kind of 2-week series in the banking and finance space where we kind of talk about where that industry is going and how they're kind of creatively using AI to enhance their customer experience and journey. And I'm excited to invite our guest for today, Ganesh Padmanabhan. He is an entrepreneur, investor, and head of partnerships at Beyond Minds. Welcome, Ganesh. Excited to have you here.
Oh, great to be here, Carrie. As I've been watching the series, it's been great. I saw some of the familiar faces and folks that I know. It's awesome.
Yes, thank you for being here. Before we get into overall, I'd love to start with you personally. You've been in the finance space, the tech space for a while. You've lived and traveled all over the world. What is it about this kind of combination of the financial industry and the technology space that fascinates you and excites you so much?
Well, first off, I think I've been in tech for a while, and been I grew up in, as you said, like in overseas, southern India, but traveled all over the world, lived a few different places. Was very fortunate to get a lot of opportunities to work on many different things, from early days of storage and data centers to cloud and infrastructure to big data to AI. And it's fascinating. Banking or financial services is always fascinating because it's the I like to say that, like, there's three things that really matters in for humanity, right? Health, wealth, and commerce. And and wealth is all about money, the idea of money, and the services that come associated with that. So banking or financial services is at the forefront. And on top of that, it's an industry that's getting disrupted from all different directions. So and the power of tech to influence change has always been very powerful. And in places where there's a lot of disruption, you have a much faster feedback loop. And that's why, financial services and tech, specifically things like AI, one of the most profound and powerful technologies humanities have ever invented. It's a huge opportunity out here.
Yes, and we were talking offline before we got on just about the changes that have happened in banking and the financial industry from, people using now their phones and their mobile apps instead of banks or in addition to, we're using AI and conversational AI. We have cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. We talked about the influence that people have on social media. So in all the time you've been in this space, where is the banking and financial institution vertical now, and where do you see it going? What are some of the trends as well?
Wow, it's the financial services industry is transforming in front of us, right? You think about it, right? You have about 130, 140,000 people rising above the poverty line every day, right? We have, connectivity is going, like, just in India where I grew up, 100 million people are going to come online, net new, this year alone, right? So you have all these confluence of factors where people have more disposable income, human prosperity is at an all-time high historically, and there is a lot of services that you will need beyond just like, I need money and I have money. But on top of that, you have the big social patterns that are changing, right? The trust, or the lack of trust in centralized institutions, are coming up in the forefront. People don't believe that the whole concept of trust, where a few chosen few will enforce trust on transactions and commerce and systems, is kind of eroding now that with connectivity, you don't need that kind of a system to go do that, right? So with all of this come in, the traditional banking system, traditional financial services system, which was a one-stop shop traditionally for everything from getting your checking account to your savings account to mortgages to lines of credit to the entire ecosystem, they cannot scale in that current fashion. And that's what we are seeing right now, wherein you have, on one hand, entrepreneurs and innovators are actually looking at this as an opportunity, saying, how do I build a modern bank? What's the most critical part that I need to do? Well, if you just want to worry about lending, I'll just do an app for lending, right? Can I just do a phone-based banking alone, no physical locations, or an online digital-only bank on top of it? There is an unbundling of the traditional financial services institution that's happening, right, across the board. So there is the one-stop shop concept is also getting challenged. What that does is the traditional players, the folks who have been the historic winners in the space, because they've been great at providing amazing services, they really have to up their game, right? And that's where the power of technology comes in. That's where the power of, they definitely have a moat because they have the systems, the institutions, or I would like to say the yesterday's systems in place where people are transacting and talking and participating in that whole system. Some of the foundational elements, things like cryptocurrencies, things like decentralization, are challenging some of the foundations of it. Things like trust, right? You don't. If I have decentralized thing where I have programmable trust or a trustless network that can be built using incentives like the Bitcoin network, for example, you don't need centralized institutions to enforce trust between transacting parties. So those are structural and changes that are happening. But even in the regular, when you have so many customers trying to come into the fold of banking, there are more new people are banking today than they did like yesterday or last month, right? So your traditional systems of staffing with people and having remote offices and branches and stuff, those are not going to scale. You got to reach out to customers or these new prospects through different channels. Do you have to engage with them in a different way? Millennials don't want to talk to anybody when they pick up the phone, right? I mean, and yeah, the Gen Zs won't want to even correspond with a human being if they can, if they don't have to. So I'm not a generational expert, but I'm just broadly categorizing. But the idea is like the world is changing. The systems, the current systems and processes and methods are not going to scale. So you have technology to the rescue and able to scale, reach the right players through the different channels they right now engage with. That's critical on one hand. The other hand, you have to ensure that some of the foundational changes like trustless networks and lean mean operations, decentralization, those are things that financial institutions have to really take into account. And then the other thing is expectations are changing too, right? You have the consumerization of everything. You go to we were talking earlier about, I was talking about liquidity during a Bitcoin crisis that's in the last few days. And to take a home line of credit, if you want, for example, it takes 30 to 45 days. Well, I can go to BlockFi and use my crypto as collateral, and within an hour, I can have the same amount with no documentation, nothing. They have my collateral right in them. I have it in their custodian service. That is the new way people will want to expect, will begin to expect services from any traditional financial institutions, right? So on the one hand, you have new customers through new channels coming on, and you have to engage them and interact with them and really bring them into the fold and provide services. There are structural changes like decentralization, crypto, that you have to really try to participate in and really transform your own business as a financial services institution to go do that. And then three is the whole notion of the traditional, the expectations are changing. I'm not going to wait for an underwriter to underwrite my property insurance for like 16 days, right? I want to go to Lemonade and get my binding quote right at the edge, right there, right? And so all of these are what are really driving the massive transformation we're seeing in financial services.
Do you see, we were talking a little bit offline as well, that we're starting to see, these smaller entities come into play, other companies, startups, apps that are kind of taking these pieces of banking. Do you see maybe this trend of banks utilizing some of these startups as part of their overall entities? Do you see these startups growing into their own kind of financial institutions? I mean, is there a place for where banks are? Will they continue? Of course, we can't exactly predict, but based on what you just said, there's so many things that are changing and need to change. What do you think about this?
No, it's going to be it's an interesting question because we're in the middle of transformation, and anything I say will probably be wrong, right? But there are a couple of big things that are happening. One is size was a differentiator back in the day. If you're a big bank with one of the big fives, I mean, you can dominate any markets. Well, that's not going to be the case moving forward, right? I mean, especially in a decentralized market when participants are decentralized, we saw the GME Reddit group example, the Robinhood example, how the power structures are shifting. We talked about meme stocks like Dogecoin and stuff, right? Influencers, edge, the population, the general retail investors can really shape, make or break markets and shape markets and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are changing there. So size as a differentiator is not going to be such that big a deal. Now that said, I think it's going to be, and that's one side. The other side is there is this huge open finance or open banking kind of an ecosystem emerging, wherein it is going to be around how do I service the, forget what I have and what my systems have and what my differentiator is. It's about the customer. It's about what do I do to ensure that the service is not interrupted, done in a fashion that the customer is actually appreciating and stuff. So you will start seeing there's a lot of cross-party transactions. Everybody will have to play together. It's going to be an ecosystem evolving. That's the way I see this happening. On the other hand, on the just classic diffusion of innovation argument, you will have a lot of really smart innovators that are like early small digital banks. That's going to be like the Chimes, the Sophies of the world, that are going to be the big banks of tomorrow, right? And banks like the JP Morgan Chase and the Citibank and stuff, they all have their size and existing relationship. But over the next, I don't know, like the next 30 to 50 years, there's going to be such a lot of intergenerational wealth transfer that you have a whole new ecosystem of players coming into the fold. And if you don't really engage them, then you'll be the small bank in the future, and those guys will be the modern banks of of the future, right? I mean, it will be the bigger companies and successful banks of the future, right? So there's a lot of changes. It's very hard to tell, but that said, there's a few things that both parties can do, right? Traditional institutions, I mean, classically, they are, and I'm very fortunate to actually have worked with many of the leading banks. They're all innovating in their own regard in many different ways, right? Everything from front office transformation to how do I engage better? How do I use different channels to engage with my clients and prospects and service them better, to middle office, like in terms of just risk management and so forth, and then back office, right? All the things that you want to do, that how do I really make my bottom line efficient and so forth. So there's all these, I would say, pockets of innovation happening. I think what probably needs to happen to really bootstrap, really accelerate the rate of innovation, is to take an approach where how do I think of banking as a technology platform instead of a traditional platform bolted on with technology, right? I think there isn't enough institutions thinking like that in the traditional way, and it's hard to do because you're working with so many different moving parts, right? But that's the advantage for the smaller players coming in. They come in with saying, here's my whiteboard, and I'm going to start building a technology platform, and that is going to provide some banking services, right? Very different mindset, if you will.
Yeah, which reminds me of actually kind of what we're doing here. There was, it's still prevalent now, but it was like every company has to be a media company. Well, now every company has to be a tech company as well. You have to be able to be on all of those sides. Going into where AI fits into this, a lot of times we hear about data, who owns the data, having enough data. And you were on another podcast and you said that, that it's not so much about the actual data, but the knowledge you harness out of the data, and this discussion of, well, how do we harness this human knowledge? Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that, and then also where AI fits into all of this of what you just mentioned?
Sure. So, I mean, it's interesting. AI is, I fundamentally am a big believer, huge evangelist for AI for that matter, right? Because I do believe that it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for individuals and institutions and stuff to really, the core of this, and I'll come to what I meant by that statement, but the core of this is saying the world has become really, really a lot more complicated over the last few centuries, right? For humans to really, expand our intelligence spectrum, human intelligence hasn't really evolved that much over the last 200 years, right? So the AI is a part of an intelligence revolution where you're trying to provide that body of intelligence to non-living things to augment the human experience in the process, right? And that's what AI is all about, in my view. Now, with that in mind, right, then the question becomes like, how do I really codify this knowledge or this intelligence, right? And broadly speaking, everybody have their definitions for AI. To me, it is about how do I transform the three broad buckets of perception, like how do I perceive, sense different things that are happening, thinking, how do I make decisions based on data, and acting, which is robotics and things like that. How
Mhm.
do I package that whole thing and deliver a human cognitive function as an experience through software? That's what AI is all about. So um, it's when you think about it that way, right? With it's data is, and the reason AI is popular today than it was before, because I think there's a statistic that goes, there more data has been produced in the last 2 years than the entire human history, right? So it all
Yes.
comes down to where you have what's on the data, right? Now, there's two kinds of this. There's a lot of problems that, so machine learning requires you to actually train your models with data. So there is the classic problems of how do I really, collect all the data, prepare it and stuff. And there are many different approaches to it. So that specific comment that I made was more about, it's not so much about the data itself, but what's within the data. And there's a lot of approaches that is being done today, on the technical side, like convoluted graph networks and stuff like that. There are some amazing, innovations coming in. But the whole idea is, like, instead of like trying to harness and gather and collect and prepare data, is a fool's errand. You'll keep doing it for the rest of your lives, right? You're never going to be done, right? It's like building software. You don't have to ever say you're done. It'll be in the next release, right? It's like that. Data gathering, data preparation is a hard problem because of that. The better way to approach it is saying, what is residual within the data? Can I use techniques like AI to extract the content out of the data, understand the features that is residual within the data, to do analytics and analysis on it, right? And one of my past companies that I helped co-found was a company called Molecular, and what we are is a machine learning feature store, and that's exactly what we do. And that was the context of that comment in that podcast, I assume, and where we actually, instead of helping everybody to copy data and make 100 million copies of it and analyzing it over and over again, we just look at the data and saying, what do I extract out of that, and use that for analytics, right? It's a vast field. It's very early. That there's a lot of potential there. Coming to financial services and stuff around AI per se, right? I think the most common areas that I see financial institutions, especially if it's banking versus insurance, is slightly different. But the broad buckets are like, how do I improve my human interaction patterns with customers, partners, and stuff? That's definitely one big bucket of problems being solved by AI. There is the risk management aspect, which is huge, and it starts with like large banks that I work with. Even basic things like, how do I understand or be aware of all the risks that's residual, like document management. You have classic example. You have so many different documents everywhere. Just instead of actually having people look at it and saying, how do I create like a surveillance system? And there are a lot of banks doing that, right? Internally looking at all this and extracting content out of it, and then looking at risk factors and stuff to make better decisions, right? And then on the other hand, like classic processes and process automation. How do I really do more with less and automate things and reduce human errors, right? I like to say, like, we're humans, and that means we make mistakes, we get emotional, we get biased, we don't want to listen to people, right? Well, that's a perfect example of those kind of use cases. If you can have an artificially intelligent system look at it and do the automation for it, you don't get any of that. Now, for more creative kind of work, you don't really have, we're not there yet. We don't have like super AGI to help you with any of the creative tasks yet. But broad buckets, so there's a lot of, AI is, I fundamentally believe, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. As one of my mentors used to say, it's an opportunity to be exponentially ahead of your competition for all these institutions, or be geometrically left behind, right? So if you don't act today, you're going to be left behind. The first mover has a huge advantage than you would usually attribute to.
Yes, I 100% agree on that. And as we've been having these conversations the last few weeks, a couple things to kind of relay on what you're saying. There are sometimes these fears for banks and financial institutions that say, well, I don't want, any of this AI to replace the human touch. I don't want them to replace, the kindness or the effort that we put in. That's a lot of our brand. Or there's fear it's going to replace our people, and that's concerning internally. But then you look at the other side of what you just mentioned about the need for the interaction with the human beings. And when we talk about, for example, conversational AI, whether that's a chatbot or a voice bot or something, where there is this bot that's interacting with you in a human-like way, there's value to that. Can you speak a little bit about these fears that maybe these financial institutions have, and where something like conversational AI could help, but it doesn't necessarily take away from what they're mentioning?
Yeah, no. So first up, the fear is not unique to financial service institutions, right? Everybody's worried about AI taking jobs away, and the funny thing is everybody talks about the 500,000 jobs that'll be lost in the next 10 years. They don't talk about the net new jobs that'll be created, the billions of jobs that could be created because AI is taking over those things, right?
Yeah.
Classic example. If you asked me in 2001 when I graduated out of college, that hey, let's explore digital marketing as a career choice. I'm like, what the hell is that? What is digital marketing in those days? Those didn't exist, right? Now it's dime a dozen. Everybody's a digital marketer. So, I mean, there's a lot of net new jobs that will be created eventually, right? And there's obvious, it's a very touchy subject because there's a lot of social disruption. There is the economic displacement that'll happen. So the policy, there's a lot of things that we have to do across the society to support that, right? That's that topic aside. For banks or like financial services institutions, I think the way you think about it is saying, look, I mean, you have to, as in any project that you do with AI and technology, you have to really have a good understanding is what is your unique differentiator for that customer. Is that personal, the branch? If you're like, I don't use a lot of regular banks services anymore, right? It's all digital banks and stuff. But if you're like a branch office focus, you're helping and you're focusing on retirees for their financial planning. Maybe, yeah. I mean, that's probably your existing. If you replace that, when the retired person calls in and finds out what his thing is, and there's an automated machine talking to them, you're probably not going to have the same level of customer intimacy in that interaction, right? So you have to get a very good understanding what is your unique differentiator. That said, I think things like conversational AI, you got to think about it. Voice is a new platform, right? The reason podcasts and stuff are actually evolving is because humans have a bandwidth problem, right? We can't type fast enough, right? We can't really we can't use our thumbs fast enough or even type fast enough. So we have to use voice as a computing platform. And that's a different way to think about it. And with that said, now, if I really use voice in the way I understand people, what they speak, understand different things around them, right? Rather than just relying on a human being, how can I really look at it as augmenting my human being who's talking to that person? For example, if you're a bank and you're really good at customer service and you make everybody go, wow, I would love to bank with these people because every time I call them, they're awesome, right? Well, you could actually augment that person and make him even a better superhuman who's talking on the other side by giving him voice analytics live in real time saying, look, this person is telling you this, but here's something that's bothering them, we think, based on this analytics, right? Ask them about it, right? I had a customer, we at Beyond Minds, we have a customer that we work with, and they were looking at like a call center kind of a use case. And what we do is actually look at, instead of just that person having to look through 15 different tabs to understand how the customer is doing, what their accounts are, and so forth, we give them a dashboard that is just real-time insights from various content other than outside of just that conversation. That's a great example. And it's not just conversational AI versus NLP versus thing. And the power of this comes in when you take an ensemble approach to the problem, right? You're solving a business process problem. And if that problem can be solved by augmenting the human at the other end of the phone, by giving them voice analytics, by giving them real-time feedback on what's happening, and bringing content and intelligence from other sets of data sets, it's just impossible for a human to just look through files and things, and it would be a very terrible experience at the end of it to do that, right? So there's a lot of those kind of things. So in general, though, stepping back, banks and financial service institutions shouldn't really worry about it saying, I don't think so. Hey, it's going to take, there's always going to be that reskilling and education that you have to do internally. But the value comes in when you start looking at this and saying, how do I, instead of saying, oh, you'll have to do it. RPA is a great example. Robotic process automation. A lot of banks I've interacted with do say that, look, I mean, I use 300 people to do this processing today. Can I get that down to 150 people, right? It's going to happen, right? Well, but they're also having the conversation. The banks I know, the folks I work with, they're also having the conversation saying, look, that 150 people there who will be displaced by this, how do we reskill them to be really good at what we do, make that human connection. They shouldn't be just pushing papers and pins and clicking on things and doing data entry. That can be automated. But when you do that, take them and say, put them in the front line, have more of them have conversations with them, right? So there's a lot of different ways to think about it. It's a snapshot of how, as a country and as a global civilization, we have to approach it, because automation and AI, just like any other innovation in the past, is going to displace a part of the workforce, right? That's a given, right? It's not going to be. I mean, like it's like it'll give rise to a new form of a digital blue collar kind of a workforce, if you will. So now then the question is, when that happens, you'll have to approach it from a perspective of how do I really use that human capital in better ways? And that's the same problem you have to approach at an organizational or institutional level, right? But I think it'll definitely be a mistake not to really harness the power of the technology to transform the human experience in the process.
Yeah, and I think, as you're talking, obviously utilizing the technology is kind of that first piece. You talk also a lot about everything being omni-channel, but then where does brand fit into this? How do you create, your institution to stand out, to differentiate itself, to create a great customer experience so that when they are on various platforms, if they're on their mobile phone or they're on the website or they're in person or they're listening to something or speaking to something, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to really showcase a brand while using all of this technology and AI?
Well, I mean, it's a few. I mean, the classic challenges or the classic approaches for brand building and brand uh, uh, improvement still holds, right? Consistency and emotion, right? Appealing to an emotion, doing it consistently in steps. Now, with things like AI, the ability and conversational AI, sonic branding, all these different things, you now have the ability to really drive that consistency across multiple channels, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's one way to think about it. You can actually, I don't think it's just AI, but AI provides a set of tools that you can do that. You can do things like artificial neural networks. I mean, like or the GANs, right, generative adversarial networks, to actually really simulate. And we all see enough fake videos. I mean, imagine if you can actually have like real computer generated or AI generated videos that really drive that consistency across multiple platforms, multiple interactions, and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunities from that perspective in general. But I think branding, just approach it the classic way, but use the power of technology, harness the power of technology to go drive that consistency, bring out that emotion. A while ago, I did this project with a large media company in AI, and what we did was looked at the big game ads, for about 3 years in a row, and use computer vision algorithms. We do a lot of work in computer vision at BeyondMinds, and you can really pinpoint now to say, for if your scene has these characteristics, if there is an expensive actor and a little puppy in the same screen, well, the puppy is driving more eyeballs and ratings for your ad, not the expensive actor, right? So that can drive more efficiency. But imagine the same thing applied to brand building, right? Exactly based on, viewer characteristics and ratings and so forth, when somebody's viewing a piece of content, AI can now pinpoint exactly what about the content is driving that positive emotional response, and then that can be then replicated or driven consistently across multiple channels, multiple platforms. So lot of opportunity there for sure.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear that type of data can be pulled out so then you can really understand, is what I'm doing working and how do I adjust it? Because that is a huge part of AI and certainly conversational AI, that it has to be constantly adjusted because things that are used with language, what's working, what are people responding to, what are they not? How do I make this better? Can you share either what Beyond Minds has done or anything else, maybe specific use cases for the banking and financial industries that have utilized AI or conversational AI or anything that kind of pertains to our conversation? Because I think use cases help industries understand possibilities
Yep.
of things that they could do.
Absolutely. So Beyond Minds, we are a Tel Aviv headquartered organization, enterprise AI platform, and what we're really trying to solve is AI has a customization problem, right? Wherein every problem is unique, every customer is unique, the data sets that you use to train the models are going to be unique. So really productizing an AI is a really tough problem. And what we have done is actually solved it using a very modular platform that allows you to really industrialize the AI experience, right? Not just a machine learning model, but how do I take a model, combine it with 5 other models, and deliver an outcome that can then be delivered as a subscription service, AI as a service. So that's what Beyond Minds does, and our big focus is in financial services and then manufacturing and government use cases as well. On financial services broadly, we actually go everything from servicing, so using natural language processing to develop a FAQ rather than just a chatbot. How do I codify the knowledge that is residual in all those interactions so that you can query it, understand it, and stuff? Those are some of the projects that we've done using our platform. And the value that we bring in is actually we can really rapidly, in a 10-week period, we have a 10-week guarantee that we go live within 10 weeks, right? So it's a very powerful value proposition. Another popular use case that we do is on financial fraud. And it is an aspect of looking at transactions on top of a transaction management system or independently to look for anomalies. And the problem in banking is about how do I reduce my false positives and false negatives. You don't want to lose something. You use a fraudulent transaction. You also don't want to spend a lot of time trying to chase down a transaction that actually wasn't fraud, but was tagged as fraud. So those two problems, we solve that with a very high degree of accuracy. So again, using AI and looking at time series data to go do that, very specific on that front. And then risk in general, risk management of how do I look at streams of data, interactions, customer onboarding, right? Like KYC as an example is a use case that's very popular. There are a lot of players who do very specific things. They only do like computer vision to look at the IDs to see whether there's any ID fraud that is being used, right? But combine that with email correspondence to voice analytics to really look at it and say, what's my score of the risk of this person being a fraudulent actor? Looking at things like final beneficiary, all those things around KYC and onboarding of customers. That's a big part of our focus. And on the insurance side, we are seeing a lot of tractions. The insurance industry is also getting disrupted pretty dramatically, where the lemonades of the world are really providing binding insurance at the edge when people click, and then you provide a risk profile and you're doing underwriting at the edge. So there is a lot of focus on one hand, it's just claim automation. How do I really automate claims, look for fraud on claims, and highlight that so I really empower my underwriter with AI to do their job better and more efficiently. On the other hand is how do I really automate a lot of the edge process, like customer onboarding, providing binding quotes at the end, looking at really, cognitive underwriting, as we would call it, right? So those are some of the use cases that we use in financial services. And we do a lot of, there's a lot of our depth has been in dealing with time series data, the industrialization of AI, so things like trust and, how when the data decays at the edge in production, how do you really autocorrect it? We have AI looking at AI systems, that kind of stuff that we do, and a pretty powerful set of capabilities that we bring in at Beyond Minds.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. It's definitely something that is needed as we're getting more AI, more software. We need to have kind of that back end working as well. We talk so much, you provide so much value here. Is there maybe one tip or one piece of advice that you'd like to leave the banking and financial industry in terms of either how to get started in AI or how to make sure that you're doing AI and conversational AI well?
Sure. So if you're not started in AI, you'll think you're really late. I mean, there's a good possibility you're late, but that's where honestly, folks like Beyond Minds, companies like Beyond Minds come in, right? Look for a partner who will really accelerate it, and ask your existing partners about delivering AI as a service. Can you just, instead of me having to ramp up my center of competence, building content and things like that, there should be a sliver of use cases that I can just get started on off the get-go, right? Rather than spending 2 years to set it up. So use partners effectively. It doesn't have to be Beyond Minds, but any partner that you existingly work with, right? Look for solutions that really give you like at least a little bit of edge. And most of that focus is going to be around reducing costs and improving operational efficiency and stuff, right? The growth part comes in when you want to build a new product with the data you have and stuff. That's where you really have to build some institutional knowledge and stuff. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, where you've actually already started on AI, and one common theme that we see everywhere, and everybody got started with AI about 3 to 5 years ago. They've done a bunch of use cases. they usually have like a it's like a scale that looks like this, wherein you have a lot of these pilot projects, hardly anything makes into production because you don't think about the things you need to worry about in production. You don't think about what happens when I've trained it with this clean data that is just clean and tagged and everything, and the whole thing I get garbage on a particular form that the customer fills in, right? How do I deal with that? How do I go put this into production? How do I really industrialize the efforts that I've already done and not put unable to get it into production? So solving that, look for partners. And the ML ops, the machine learning operations, is a big emerging field. That is not the answer for it, because what that gives you is just another tool set for you to actually just go and play with it. And you're going to be still there, right? So again, look for partners, look for organizations you can partner with that allow you to take those pilot POC ML models and use cases that you've developed and push it into production, right? Industrialize that whole thing. And so that's another way. If you're on the extreme end of the spectrum, chances are your AI throughput rate, and I've written about this at VentureBeat, is very low. There's a 90% probability you're actually on the lower end of the spectrum, and like 2 to 5, 10% is what people are able to put in production. And some of them, AI or ML is a very experimental science. So some of that failure rate is natural, but then you need to approach it more from a engineering perspective. How do I engineer my way into production deployments and business value, right? So I think those are the two ways I would say. And you asked me for one, I gave you two. But
it's always good to have more knowledge. I think it's good.
Very good. No, it's but the common thread being don't wait, right? I mean, it's like the time is now. Every day or month or year or week you wait, you're falling a little bit behind because somebody else is gaining the advantage of the compound interest that AI brings in, right?
Yeah, and I think, it's sometimes it can feel overwhelming to people, but, as we've shown on this show, there are just so many people in this space, and being able to, like you said, reach out to various partners to help you facilitate that so you don't have to handle it yourself. So if people want to learn more about anything we discussed, they want to connect with you, they want to learn more about Beyond Minds, where's the best place to do that?
So BeyondMindsAI, you can connect with me on Twitter, at _Ganesh P, or on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to actually hear from others who are practitioners who are trying to solve problems. I have a pretty good network of folks who have probably been there in the same spot that you were. So happy to even connect and connect you with others who have solved this problem. But BeyondMindsAI to get to know more about the use cases, what we've done. Reach out back to me, and we'll be happy to work together.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ganesh, for sharing just, again, your passion and incredible insights in this financial space as well as AI. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Carrie. Have a good rest of the day, and thanks for putting together a great show.
Yes, and if you are watching and listening, don't forget to subscribe to our ReadSpeaker AI YouTube channel, as well as our audio podcast called Creative in Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts.